doing out there, guys? So, kind of thought I'd make a quick follow-on video to our bumping versus bounding video. I had a lot of people ask some specific questions, and so the original video was the foundational concept of it. Now, how you apply it to every individual situation scenario kind of varies a little bit, so I thought I'd answer a couple of the questions that we got from people. So now, I don't know where my tactical poker chips are. I lost them when I moved, so I've got tactical duct tape, and then I've got tactical painter's tape, so you're going to have to bear with me on that. So, first, kind of quick scenario I'm going to talk about where we'll have to institute some form of bumper bound, or what I just call a hey man, you got me, is, and this happens in your urban environment all the time, is we make this kind of 90-degree turn. So I set this up as a 90-degree turn, where obviously it's walled off, but in reality it's just any sort of 90-degree turn, or any sort of turn you might have to make where we're going to lose observation. So we want to use what we call kind of the chain of custody method. So not every single person within an element will have eyes on every other person, and that's fine, but every single person has to be viewed by somebody else, who is in turn viewed by somebody else in the elements. We got that chain of custody. So if the number 1 man can be seen by 2, 2 can be seen by 3, and 3 can be seen by 4, we have total visual accountability and visual comms, as we call it. So we come to this corner right here. If we're in this small unit, if we're a small element, this fire team type of size, we don't necessarily need to do anything fancy. This number 1 guy, when he comes up to it, he's going to keep his orientation here into the unexplored territory. And once the number 2 man comes up, he can bump him specifically, or usually what we'll kind of do is just, what I call, hey man, I got you. So this number 2 guy, once he gets up close enough that he can see the number 1 guy, number 1 guy is just going to go ahead and go around the corner. Now to make it even easier, the number 1 guy, if he's on the inside of this corner, he might just even bump and end up on the far side of the road, because now it's easier for the number 2 man to see him, and he can see him from farther away. Might not even have to say anything at all. But like I said, it's situationally dependent. Depends on the territory and the surrounding area a little bit. So once he's going there, number 2 man, he can go ahead and move around. These 3 and 4, they're the same thing. They go ahead and just bump and push their way up. But now we have to make sure we have the same exact level of visual comms when it comes to the last guy. So this number 3 man is going to do the same thing as the number 1 man did, or as the number 2 man did here. He's going to make sure he's got visual on this last guy when they go around. So now, while this is important, is, obviously we have to maintain integrity of our element, but as people have seen some of our other videos, I talked about in our ambush series, we talked about the inverted L-shaped ambush, and a lot of people were kind of, questioning how that might happen. And an easy way to show you exactly how that happens is this number 1 man, this number 2 man, they get a little bit too much dispersion, they don't communicate to 3 and 4, and they get far enough around this corner that this 3 and 4 guy can't see him. And the distance might not even be very far. So now they can get ambushed from either up here, over here, or legitimately on the inside of this L right here, and 3 and 4 cannot do anything to help them, and they might be totally sectioned off depending on where the enemy's at there. So that's why it's so important. So like we said, in the urban environment, we've got to keep that dispersion up, but we can't do it at the expense of being able to have our accountability and have our concentration up when we actually get into contact. So if we wanted to do the same exact scenario, but we wanted to bound instead, like I said, bounding for me is better in every way, maybe with the exception of this right here, because it's something so simple and fluid that once you've done it a few dozen or 100 times, it kind of just comes. But we can do the exact same thing if we wanted to. This number 1 man could post up, orient himself into the unexplored territory. Number 2 man just goes ahead, bounds around him. 3 man bounds around him. So then, as these guys get in front of him and his sector of fire is covered up, he go ahead, he turns around, he starts to orient himself to the rear to cover this number 4 man. Number 4 man comes around, this guy becomes the last man in the element, and he just goes ahead and continues around. So again, we keep that good accountability, and we make sure that there's no point where somebody is off in a position where we cannot see them and they can be separated from the unit. Okay guys, so we talked about how we have to use that bump and bounding in the urban environment or making those turns. It's not just the urban environment. It also applies if we're out in the boonies and the road or the trail or whatever we're on goes around a bend and there happens to be a hill there, woods there, whatever it might be. Another scenario where this applies exactly the same is when we talk about changes in elevation. So I kind of made a hill here. I get it. It's a trapezoid. I'm not an artist. But also I wanted to use that to kind of show that, and obviously you guys who've been out in the environment know that, you might come up onto a point of elevation, and then it might be flat, might be a plateau, or you might be on this position for quite a while. It's not always just up and straight down, and this isn't meant to get into the efficacy or the you should never go up the hill because you silhouette yourself or what. Sometimes it's unavoidable. We're not getting into that bullshit right here. So, same exact thing applies when you're going up this hill or down the hill. So as this number one man comes up and he gets to the top of this rise here, he needs to either stop himself whether we're going to bound or bump. It doesn't really matter right here, but same thing so we can maintain that visual communication, that visual on everybody. So he can stop here, keep his orientation to that unexplored territory. Number two man can come up and say, hey man, I got you. Or he can bump him. It doesn't really matter. And this number one guy can go ahead and move off. And so we can continue on the same way. Number two man, number three man. And then once we get all these elements up here and the number four man is still coming up, then we make sure we do the same thing as far as keeping our visual comms with him so we can see him up. And then as we get ready to go down the hill, we need to do the same thing. That way we make sure, especially going downhill, that we don't send some guy down there by himself where he's got no support, no cover, no visual communications, because anything and everything could happen when it comes to that. So if we wanted to do this as a bound, just like we talked about making the turn, we could do exactly the same thing. This number one man can come up, he can post himself staring off into the unexplored territory here. Number two man can come around, number three man can come around, number four man can come around, and then once they're around, he can pick himself back up, make sure he reorients himself back to the rear once his sector of fire gets taken up by friendlies. And they can operate in exactly the same way. So again, everything stays nice and fluid, nice and loose. Don't think too deeply in that. Basically, like we said with the chain of custody, every person needs to be observed by somebody else in the element, so we make sure we've got accountability of everybody. And we also need to make sure, because we don't think about it so much in the global war on terror, but simple things like people trying to come into our formation. That's one reason why when we come back inside friendly lines, everybody knows when we get the head count. We usually get physical, head counts. So as the guy comes through, I physically slap him on the helmet, I squeeze him, slap his ass when he goes by, however gay you want to make it, doesn't really matter. But that way we know, hey, we left with 12 packs, we're coming back in, and now all of a sudden we got 13 dudes, something happened. Same thing with vehicles. We left with 4 vehicles, and now as we're coming in, one of the posts goes, hey, why is there 5 of you? We know there's a problem, something happened, so that's why we keep this good accountability. So, one kind of last point I wanted to touch to answer other questions we had, and why I think that one reason why bounding is also really good, an additional reason I guess on that, is, and it sounds bad to say this because I've been on both ends of the spectrum. I was a boot saw gunner most of my first deployment, so until we got into the really heavy urban combat in Fallujah, we operated very much like what you think we did in Iraq. Tons and tons of patrols, cordons, searches, some small firefights, IEDs, things like that. And so, as a saw gunner, I didn't really do anything. I was outer cordon security most of the time when people went in houses, so I never went in, never searched, which worked out a couple times. I got engaged while I was out on that outer cordon. But I didn't really get to do any of the action on the inside or be involved in what was going on, with the stuff that, was actually part of the mission planning on that. And so it's kind of hard sometimes to keep yourself plugged into what's going on, especially let's say you go on a squad level patrol and you're not satellite patrolling, you're just going straight tactical comm, and you're in the 2nd Fire Team and you're in the middle and you're a saw gunner. You might not actually have anything to do other than just every 3 to 5 steps checking your 6, checking your guys, and then you're bumping on the streets, but you might not be a part of any of the cool stuff that's going on, and so that kind of weighs on you. Everybody wants to be a part of or feel like they're involved in the actual meat and potatoes of the mission. So that's one kind of thing that the bounding gives us. And the other part of that is, with bounding, every single person will at some point in that patrol or that mission be in every single position within the element, within the team, within the squad. So that forces everybody to have to pay more attention, be more involved in the planning process, the briefing process, because at some point they're going to be the point man, and nobody wants to screw up. Or if they screw up, they know they're going to get punished, or they're never going to be trusted to be in that position until they can prove it again. So it forces everybody to have to do the job like they're supposed to be very involved, because they know that they're going to come into that role. And I think in that way it's kind of freeing for a lot of people, because it kind of simplifies it. So just answering a couple questions you guys had. Remember, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.